Welcome, everyone. You are listening to Get Out of Your Own Way with me, April Yee, on Transformation Talk Radio. Get out of your way and get what you want through transformative self-care. I'm here to support you in getting out of your own way. So, what does getting in your own way look like? Well, how about letting other people define your value and worth, ignoring your body by not taking care of yourself, and people pleasing? These are just a few ways I've gotten in my own way. In this show, I'll share new perspectives on self-care practices so you can discover options and choices for expanding what's possible for you and your life. In each episode, I have questions for you, and when you take the time to answer them, they'll help in building up your belief about yourself. I believe that when we get good with ourselves, we get good with our lives and the world. Get out of your own way starts now. Hi, everyone. You are listening to Get Out of Your Own Way on Transformation Talk Radio, episode 19. The concepts I talk about in each episode are things I wish I learned sooner to support myself and get out of my own way. So I hope these ideas are coming to you when you need them. For today's episode, I have another guest visiting the podcast, and each of my guests, like all of us, have gotten in their own way in some aspect of their lives, and they've figured out how to get out of their own way with support, resources, and wisdom that they've gained along their journey. And since this podcast is called Get Out of Your Own Way, I'll be asking my guests, how have you gotten in your own way? And how did you learn to get out of your own way? And we'll be hearing from them and their stories, and you might even recognize yourself in what they share. So today I'm happy to have Dalglish Chew join me. And I met Dalglish at Stanford University in a program called T Group, which was an introductory program where it's for a larger class called Interpersonal Dynamics at Stanford. And it's sort of like introducing us to the concept of a T group and what we would learn from the different people who are in the group. And we met as strangers over a long weekend, but as we got to meet each other and have like 9-hour days together, we definitely learned a lot about each other. And Dalglish and I have kept in touch. So I'll read Dalglish's bio. Dalglish Chew is a leadership coach who helps founders, investors, and executives look inwards to lead forwards. Points of pride in his career include partnering with the largest health systems in the country to unlock top-line growth as an associate partner at McKinsey and working with nonprofits in support of education equity. After a varied career, he has come to own coaching as his life's work. He is a Columbia University certified executive coach, a certified narrative Enneagram practitioner, a certified practitioner of the Leadership Circle 360 profile, and a trained facilitator for the Stanford Graduate School of Business's most popular elective, Interpersonal Dynamics, or more popularly known as touchy-feely. So, hi, Dalglish.
Hi, good to be with you.
So, before we get into the main question, I'll be asking, how did you decide to do what you're doing today, being an executive coach and a facilitator at Stanford?
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how to answer that question without giving you my whole life story. But so you got the highlights, right? I think when we met, actually, I think it was the beginning of 2021, or was it 22? 22. We did T Group in 2022. I think I was at a pivot point in my career. I was still at McKinsey and Company. I was still on the partner track, but I had already made the decision to leave, and I just didn't know what yet I was going to do. I think I'm now a leadership coach and facilitator, as you noted. I think the simplest way to answer is that when I sort of took a pause and really thought about two things. One, what I really felt I was good at, like what was my superpower, the thing that comes easily to me, that, comes more easily to me than it does to others, that I do almost like unconsciously. And that's one question. And the other question was, what problem do I really want to solve? And so when I looked at the first question, like, what is it that I seem to do naturally? Like, it's like water to me, like breathing. And it turned out to be about people, sort of understanding people, talking to people, helping them through their problems, reading people, understanding them. And to my own surprise, because I don't think I ever identified as a people person. So it was almost my own surprise that when I, asked people for feedback or really looked at the trajectory of my career, that was what I turned out to be good at. I remember talking to my teams at McKinsey who, I would often lead my teams and say, when we talk to this client, like be careful not to say that or make sure to say it that way. And they would always ask me like, how did you know? Because I would be right more often than not. And I would try to explain it to them and I realized I actually don't know. I just know and I can't explain it to you. And that was my first clue. I would also get drawn into a lot of, interpersonal dynamics, like whether with difficult clients or sort of internal team dynamics. I would just sort of naturally gravitate towards like being pulled to sort of solve and address those types of things. So that was one realization, like there's a thing here. Although that in and of itself, I didn't know what to do with that. Does that make you like, was that HR? I didn't really want to be HR person. Is that organizational development? I didn't know. So it wasn't until I actually did T group and met coaches that I understood that, there is this sort of work you can do at the individual and group level. And also I had this thought that, wow, I've been doing that for free my whole life, talking to people about their problems. So anyway, here's maybe a job for me. But the problem I wanted to solve, and the reason I do the work I do now is that I just saw so much, and I use the word suffering, pain and suffering in the workplace. So many people, so much unhappiness, so much frustration, so much angst, because our relationships at work are not great. Like there are people we have to tiptoe around. There are people who bring their issues and sort of blind spots into the organization. And if these people are in power and these people are in leadership positions, then whatever it is that's holding them back end up impacting dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. And there can be a lot of kind of pain and suffering there. And that was the problem coming out of my years in McKinsey that I really wanted to solve. And so
Mm.
putting the two together, right? Like coaching is a way of working with this stuff, understanding people, understanding connection, understanding interpersonal dynamic, that can be a key to unlocking these types of problems and just putting it all together. That's kind of where I've ended up in the work I do.
I love that. I really
Yeah.
appreciate how you were able to, integrate things and actually first become aware of things that you were good at that seemed just kind of intuitively natural to you, and also to actually put those together and solve a problem. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. And so, to the question, how did you used to, or how have you gotten in your own way in the past?
Yeah, I thought about, the prompt and your show, and because we met in T group and in
Yeah.
the context of this class called interpersonal dynamics, which is to me all about connection. Like how do we connect? Because we all want more connection in our lives, right? Personally, professionally, and how do we do that? And I think what we experienced in the T group was very eye-opening for me in terms of, how do people experience me? What am I doing that either distances me from other people or draws them closer? How do I foster more connection and belonging in my life, or how do I get in my own way of that? So I
Mm.
think that, I mean, I was thinking a lot about that because, that is the context in which we met. So maybe we sometimes spend some time talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in the past, would you say that you liked connecting with people and liked being connected to people, or was it something different?
It's so interesting because I think, it's almost like a human need, right? Whatever we might believe. I mean, there are introverts and extroverts, people who are more social or not. But I do think, connection, human connection is like a need we all have, almost like
Mhm.
food or sleep or drink or water. So I think that's always true. But there are stories we tell ourselves. So to make it more personal, I think when we met at the beginning of 2022. You can share with your viewers how I came across. I mean, I've always been more closed off,
Mm.
more introverted. I kept people, maybe still do on some level at arm's length. I'm not the easiest person to get to know,
Mm.
but I all the time I wanted to feel connected. I wanted to have close relationships. I wanted to be understood and seen. So even at that level of personality, these preferences and ways I would show up was in some ways getting in the way of that. Yeah. And
Mm.
you can sort of confirm that how I used to be.
Yeah, well, when I first met you, I mean, I remember having a great conversation with
Mm,
you. And I remember you like saying something about how you've just always checked the boxes or felt like a need to check these
mm,
certain boxes. And then that was it. It's like if I check
mm,
these boxes, then that's it. Like I've
mm.
shown up the way that I needed to.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, from doing that, there were missed possibilities or missed connections, and that you eventually learned or recognized, became aware that you wanted to go deeper with people?
Mm. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the context in which I said what I said and what I might have meant. I think this idea of checking boxes was probably had to do with my and my basic orientation, or the way I pay attention to what's going on around me is like what's needed here.
Mm,
I'm talking to someone. What do they need? What do they need
mm,
from me? And I'll give exactly that, and that's it. Are they asking me, so let's say it's a professional context.
mm,
Someone comes and asks like, oh, do you have that thing that I need? So
mm,
okay, well here's the thing. Or someone has a question like, hey, do you know where that file is? Okay, here's the file. Right. So I think there was a way that I sort of took these very literally. Like, oh, you need something, I give it to you, and that's it, right?
mm,
As if it's not like a human an interaction between two humans. And so there's a way that, these interactions sort of become exactly, they can sort of be as simple and as transactional as that if that's where you stay,
mm,
right? I mean, even a simpler example, people can ask, like, oh, what did you do this weekend or over the summer? And you say, okay, well, here's what I did. The end of conversation. Like, there's a sort of like, well, you asked the question, I answered. I'm checking the box.
yeah.
But as we all, I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced like connection, you know, we have to go somewhere. We have to go a bit
Mhm.
deeper than that level of communication where we're at, where we're just talking about the weather or talking about what's on TV. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there like a discomfort that you felt with going deeper, and that's maybe why staying
Hmm.
surface or transactional was more comfortable?
Yeah. And here's where everyone's reasons are going to be different, I think. I think for me, one belief that I think has been persistent and that I've had to work with is I'm not sure they actually want to know more,
Mm.
right? If you haven't asked me, maybe you asked me what I did and I told you. Maybe you didn't ask me how I felt or whether I enjoyed it or what it meant to me, for example.
Mm.
And so, well, if you didn't ask me, then I don't, I'm not sure that you want to know,
Um,
right? So there is a little bit of a sort of maybe a belief about self,
mhm,
right? Like, do people want to know what I have to say? Do people want to know what's here inside? And maybe they don't. And maybe that's the assumption I walk around with. And so I'm less inclined to share if not
mm.
asked. Hmm.
I can relate to that. I know in therapy, like I told my therapist one time about how whenever friends asked me how I was, I would just like answer
Hmm.
very quickly and then sort of like deflect and say like, "Oh, but then how are you?" or like, "What's
Yes.
going on with you?"
Right.
And she said that that was a way for me to not take up space
Mm-hmm.
because, and I think this was the underlying reason, it's because I didn't think I had any value to
Hmm.
add,
Yeah,
right?
it's the occupational hazard for coaches, right? We're great at making things about other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. There can be a sort of deflection or and not wanting to be the focus of attention,
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to receive the attention.
Mm.
All
Where
right.
do you
So
think
there's,
that comes from?
oh gosh, so many places. Hmm. For me specifically, I mean, there is a cultural piece. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
both East Asian. I don't think a lot of a lot of emotion and sort of depth in East Asian culture, I think can happen non-verbally.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, think about Asian parents, like they care about you and they love you, but it's not said. It's shown maybe, or it's sort of in this vibe, this sort of non-verbal sort of relationship that we have. So there is a little bit of not being comfortable with verbalizing, like
Mm-hmm.
actually saying, I'm interested, I want to know, and
Mm-hmm.
actually having that conversation can be a little bit against the grain culturally.
Yeah.
That's one. Where else could it come from? I don't know. I think it can also just come from not knowing what it looks like. If you've
Mm.
never received that sort of regard and attunement and interest for various reasons, right? Whether
Yeah.
your parents were busy doing other things or maybe it was given to you, but for whatever reason you missed it because you
Mm.
weren't paying attention or because you were primed not to receive it. Anyway, I think there can be a history of just not even knowing
Yeah.
what this is. And therefore, in encounter with it in your adult life, like not even know, like missing it. Someone could
Mm-hmm.
be expressing interest and you're just like, really? I had no idea. I had no idea. That has happened to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in that case, how can we learn to recognize that? I mean, this sounds so basic, but it's actually it can be really deep. So how do we learn how to
Mm.
recognize that we have value to offer to others? And
Yeah, I mean,
how
yeah.
do we see ourselves and our own value as worthy of sharing with other people?
Hmm. So many ways to answer that. I think one concept from, one of to bring it back to how we met and touchy-feely interpersonal dynamics, there are things that are known about
Mm,
us, known by others, but not about us. People know things
mhm,
about us that we don't know.
mhm,
And there are things that we know about ourselves that other people don't know. So I
mm,
think that sort of, the implication here is that it takes self-awareness, right?
mhm,
We need to know what's going on with us. And also we need to seek out others because they're just for relational like feedback. Like there's things that about us, the way we show up, that we will not know unless we ask. So
mhm,
to bring it back, like how do we work with this? So the first is just like, one has to have some self-awareness around one's patterns, right?
mhm,
Knowing that, oh, I tend to deflect. I tend to not want to be in the spotlight for such and such reasons. And then noticing. If you need to know that about yourself first before you can start to notice how it is coming up. It
yeah.
happened when my friend, asked me a question and I immediately turned it away.
Mhm,
Misconnection there, right? But
yeah.
if without knowing that that was the thing to look for, I would have just thought it was completely normal.
Mm,
So just being aware that that is one's habit, pattern, or thing. And then other awareness, right? Like even if you had a particularly perceptive friend,
mhm,
had you not noticed about yourself, your friend could have said, "Huh, you always do that when I ask you." You know, so one could it tactically, one is surrounded by people who has experiences of oneself, right? I could
mhm,
ask the 10 people closest to me, what am I doing that
mm.
makes you feel more or less close to me, more or less connected to me? Now that takes a lot of vulnerability, of course.
Yeah.
I'm making it sound really easy, but so the sources of information are both ourselves and others.
Yeah. And so for you, how are you feeling more connected today than you have been in the past?
Yeah, I think there may be two ways of answering. One is the simpler one. It's just to allow it.
Mm, mhm,
The question might be, where is there already so much connection that you were blocking off, holding off, not receiving, right? Like the example you gave. The
mm.
people asking you how you are all the time,
Yeah.
but maybe you weren't answering.
Hmm.
Or there are people who are available and are interested in getting to know you, but you didn't register that because you were assuming that that just wasn't true. You couldn't even believe that. So
Yeah.
same for myself. I mean, I think I've more and more as I do this work, I've had people come back to me in my life more recently who maybe knew me from a while ago, and they would say like, "Yeah, I always wanted to be your friend. I wish we were closer, but I just didn't know how because you were so difficult to get to know."
Mm,
So it's sort of there's a lot of some grief and sadness in acknowledging that one has
mhm,
missed that, but
mhm.
also realizing, wow, like it's just way more available than I thought it was. If
Yeah.
you just let it in. Yeah.
So what did that look like in the past when, so like, these people who are saying you used to be unapproachable or it was
hmm
hard to get to know you,
hmm
how did you, and you sort of mentioned this before, but how did it look like for you to show up with other people in the past?
And how I would do it, like,
Yeah. And
I
you mentioned
think,
it being
yeah,
like transactional, but I'm just curious if there's
I
other
see. Yeah,
aspects.
let me try to remember. I think I would just be more reserved.
Mm,
Maybe I wouldn't offer or initiate. I would
mhm,
respond. Like if you spoke to me, I might be perfectly friendly and willing to dialogue, but it would
mhm.
be sort of there would be no momentum to it. I would sort of maybe take it very literally. Like if you ask me a question, I answer. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't assume that you were trying to build a connection with me.
Mm,
Yeah. And there was some sort of, a bit being reserved and introverted and even shy. And and there was maybe a little bit also the word that's coming to mind is like trust, right? Like how much maybe making it more difficult or not being as
mm,
trusting
mm,
of people. So maybe wondering, like, did they want something from me or what's going on here? Like
yeah.
basically not starting with the sort of positive assumption that, hey, there's a sort of budding connection here, and maybe having all kinds of other stories about what might be going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I mean, I can relate to that. And I'm curious if any of that part or any of the kind of like brushing off connection or missing connection is also because there was an idea of like responsibility. Like, oh, if
Hmm.
I become friends with this person or get to know this person more,
Mm,
like it'll be a burden or it's like it takes a lot of effort and work. Did any of
yeah,
that play
yeah.
into that for you?
I think that actually that's a good call out because there is, and this again gets very, it's very sort of personality dependent. I think
Mm,
for me, I did feel there was maybe one thing going on where I maybe didn't have as much confidence in my boundaries.
mm,
And what I mean is, in relationship, being able to say, no, I don't want that. That doesn't work for me, or here is what I want,
mm,
or not having those kinds of healthy verbalized boundaries. And because I didn't have as much confidence in my ability to do that, right? I had to sort of fall back into the more concrete boundaries, like actual, like don't come near me, or like don't talk to me, or like let's not do this thing because
yeah.
once we get into in relating, I'm
Mhm.
going to have a hard time actually having any boundaries. So I it was like, and I actually see that I do see that with clients as well, right?
Mhm.
The people who tend to be the most forbidding, the most distant, the most difficult to get to know, and the ones who really like, stay at home and these people seem so boundary, right? They have such high
Mhm.
walls. But
Yeah.
often the story is that these are the people with the sort of the most fragile boundaries, the most porous boundaries.
Mhm.
Because once you get close, it's almost as if, they can't seem to hold on to themselves. I do
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense too, because if we don't know how to set boundaries, if we don't know what our boundaries are, and then we're scared to communicate them, even if we do know, maybe because of like people pleasing tendencies or things like that, then it is almost safer to just like not create a connection
Hmm.
versus creating a connection and then thinking like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to
Yeah,
like do all these things to set
exactly.
my boundaries and protect my energy or time or whatever.
Right. It's in some way to take it to an extreme, it's sort of like in that sense, one could start to see connection itself as intrusive. To
Mm,
to connect is to start to give myself away. Well, then no
yeah,
wonder people don't want it, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And for you now, how did you decide that you want to connect deeper instead of like staying on the surface with
Yeah.
people?
Well, I mean, I think we all sort of have come to some moment when our patterns stop working. I
Mm,
think they work for a while now. My life is fine, like it's fine. Like I don't have that many close friends, or I have a few close, but that's fine. Like, I'm good with that. I think we all come to a point in our lives where we're like, wait, that's not enough, or I want more.
mm,
And that can happen for various reasons. We just sort of start realizing how impoverished our sort of old patterns were keeping us in our
mm,
lives. The other is just experience, if you're lucky, you experience something that surprises you. So we did Tea Group, which is sort of a
mm.
very strange experience. And I encourage
Oh,
everyone who's listening to please look up interpersonal dynamics at Stanford and Tea Group and just kind of learn what it's about because it's such an interesting way of working with this stuff. And obviously, I'm biased. I'm now a trained facilitator. So,
yeah.
where I was going was experiencing. Even if you have held off connection, sort of been walled off to it and sort of stayed away from it, experiencing it. It's sort of like, wow, what a breath of fresh air. Or like drinking water for the first time and you didn't realize you were parched.
Hmm.
Having a drink of water, I was like, oh my God, I've been so thirsty. Like that can sort of awaken. Like, wow, there's so much more for me here that I've been closed off to.
Yeah. So it's almost like recognizing that need that we
Hmm.
have for connection and
Yes,
then really owning it
sure.
and then taking the action to kind of like go out and create that for ourselves.
Sure. And I mean, you just laid out very neatly 3 steps, but each of those steps, right, as you know, can be so fraught.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the first one, acknowledging that we need other people. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, that was not, and maybe still isn't an easy thought to sort of contemplate. Because I mean, I very much identify with wanting to be independent, not
Mhm.
wanting to be a burden on people,
Yep.
do not want to be needy. So even the thought, wow, you know, some of my happiness depends on other people.
Mhm.
Like I'm emphasizing is like not to underestimate. Even the acknowledgement of the need can be difficult and involve a lot of work.
Absolutely. It's really vulnerable. I remember in one of my coaching certification programs, we learned about nonviolent communication and then like the needs. And
Hmm.
I was just like, I don't have needs. I like, I don't want to have needs. But
Yep,
then it's like,
exactly. Yep,
but once
exactly.
I understood the importance and just like the empowering feeling of acknowledging my needs, like that changed everything.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
can be really vulnerable to just even
Oh,
acknowledge
totally.
that we
But
have
you know,
them.
but what choice do we have? Because I think when we want to believe we don't have needs, they just come out in other kinds of ways.
Yes,
Right?
unhealthy ways.
Yeah, I mean, we see this in the workplace all the time. Like we have needs to be heard, to be understood, to be respected, to be included, and we bring all these needs to the
Mhm.
workplace, to our colleagues, but we want to pretend like, the thought of, well, the thought that I actually need my boss to
Mm,
understand me. No, how could I possibly need that? Well, guess
mm,
what? Like it's gonna come out all other kinds of ways. In your people
yeah.
pleasing, and you're
Hmm.
having no boundaries, right? In all other kinds of ways that people also pick up anyway, right?
Yeah.
There is no hiding from this stuff.
Right. And that's so true. I mean, I think that in the past, in terms of connection, I wanted connection. I wanted to feel connected. I wanted to have friends. And like what you said, I do go deeper now, but there is, maybe with
Yeah,
certain people, I still stay a little bit
sure.
distant, like at arm's length. And I think we can all do that. But how did you, when you want to connect with someone, what do you do differently now?
Hmm. Well, I think before I answer that, there's also one thing you're saying, which is like this
Mm,
work is a continuum, right?
mm, mhm,
It it meaning like your edge just keeps moving. It's
mhm,
not like you graduate from connection school and now you everything is connecting and great and wonderful. It just means that your edge just keeps moving out. Like the certain things get easier, but then certain things remain difficult.
mhm.
So that I just wanted to put that out there as a mental model. And then what do I do differently now?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing I do is just like not assume so many of the things I used to assume, right?
Mm,
Not assuming, or maybe even better, assume the best.
uh,
Assume that people are interested.
mm,
Assume that people want to know more about you. I mean, it sounds silly, but I do think many of us walk around assuming the opposite.
mhm.
And that gets in the way of connection. So that's one. The other is a little bit more based on like skills, right? Like when, doing things like coaching, doing things like T group, doing things like the class we talked about. You start to realize that connection is like a practice, a skill,
Mm,
a thing you do. It's
mhm,
not, magic. It's not magic. It's not alchemy. It's not like, I mean, of course, there is interpersonal chemistry. Sometimes you meet someone, you really hit it off. There is
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But connection is something we can do, something we can learn, something we can practice. For example, like sharing something about ourselves from a real place of vulnerability, being sort of connected into feeling, right? The difference between answering the question, where did you go for, what did you do over the summer, and the literal answer, and
Mhm,
actually sharing, like, yeah, and I went here and it meant so much to me for this reasons, and I felt so blah 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 about it. That gives people a way to connect, right? Because it's sort of rooted in feeling, and you're sort of sharing something a little bit more vulnerable. So these are things you do. It's a
mhm,
skill you learn, just like, I don't know, riding a bike or,
mm,
right, swimming. Like, but I think I emphasize that because if you don't think that way, if you think connection is just this mysterious thing that either happens or not, then you're sort of at the mercy, right? Like you're sort of moving through
yeah.
the world and wondering why you're so alienated, wondering why I'm so alone, and why is it like that? Well, no, like actually there are things. The hope, I mean, the optimistic hope is that there are things you can learn to do.
Yeah. It's sort of like a muscle that you can build, with practice over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I like how you mentioned that, we're not at the mercy of connection just happening or not happening. If it's, we might think, oh, it's there or it's not. We can actually think about it as what, like, if I want there to be connection, I can contribute effort to this
Yes.
interaction
Yes.
instead
Yes.
of just assuming, like, maybe one of the things not to assume is that, oh, it's either there or it's not.
Hmm. Yeah.
And instead think like, well, maybe I can make it happen differently.
Yes. Well, I think well, yes, and I think what you're pointing out to is once you start doing this work and seeing it as a work to be done, you start to notice way more agency for
Mm,
yourself, right? There are things I can try that I haven't tried.
mm,
There are ways of communicate, like ways of communicating my needs that I was sort of not being explicit about, ways of being vulnerable that I wasn't, ways of, sharing and establishing trust. So there's so many things that open up to us. Oh, I didn't know I could do these things, say these things in this way. So that
yeah.
opens up a whole field of choice and intention and agency. But the other side also is you get a better sense of what's yours and what's not yours.
Say more
Connection,
about that.
correct connection requires two people.
Hmm.
So once you learn like, this is what authenticity, vulnerability, and sort of looks like on my side,
Mm,
right? Here's how I can hold my own authenticity and
mm,
receive someone else's. Then, you also have a clearer sense of what's mine to do in this relationship.
mm,
And when the other person, they respond the way they respond, you also have a clearer sense of, okay, that's what's going on for them. It's not about me,
mm.
right? Because I also don't want to give your viewers or the sort of idea that if you learn to do this very well, then suddenly you get to control
Right. Right.
every relationship you're in. Because
Yeah.
no, what it means is that you get a better sense of what work you have to do. Am
Hmm.
I showing up? Am I being authentic? Am I being in integrity? Am I being vulnerable? And no one's perfect, right? But
Hmm.
that's mine to do.
Yeah.
And people respond the way they respond.
Yeah. And
And
so
that's about them.
you can make an informed decision based on
Right.
the interaction.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's a really powerful reminder. And so, for knowing what you know now around how you like to connect with people and what connection means to you, what would you tell your past self who
Hmm.
struggled in this area?
Well, I would probably say there is no better way to learn. Just go out there and do it. Try things, get things wrong, make mistakes,
Mm,
experiment. Because so much of the learning in relationship, so much of learning can only happen in a relationship, you know? And this
yeah.
also gets a bit my basic personality. I tend to be a little bit more bookish, a little bit more like, oh, I want to understand the theory. I want to read and understand and learn. Like, what's I could get a PhD in connection, right? And then I would feel comfortable enough to go actually connect. I want to do all the work first to really understand it. And maybe there are people among your viewers who may resonate with that sort of approach. But for me, I mean, in the end, like moment one moment of experiencing real connection is like worth like, all the hours and years of talking about it, right?
Yeah. I heard you say in another podcast, go and find out. Like,
Oh
that's your
yeah.
new.
It is because, well, I mean, I should also say like it's a bit flippant because of course, we have so many fears and anxieties about, oh, if I go there, if I say that, if I text someone and ask, like it's so scary. Like,
Mhm.
rejection, what reaction I might get and so forth. So, but I think it's just lowering the stakes for ourselves, right? I think we imagine that the worst case,
Mhm.
you don't get a reply.
Mhm.
You share something vulnerable and the other person's like, right? Or you share with someone that you want to be more connected and they're like, I don't know. Not easy,
Mhm.
but not easy, not pleasant, and yet not the end of the world.
No.
And
I think
so,
it's
yeah,
I think it's like what we make that response or non-response mean about
sure.
ourselves. And if we are strong within ourselves about like, okay, like I made a bid for connection, it wasn't returned or reciprocated. I'm not going to make that mean that I'm not
Sure.
worthy or valuable of
Yeah. Yeah.
connection. It's
Yeah.
just, we don't even know what's going on with the other person, right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
so if we're strong in who we are and our value and our worth, I think
Yeah.
it can make it easier. Although I
Yeah.
agree with you, rejection is never fun.
Yeah. And again, it's a continuum, right? Like, practice getting rejected by complete strangers, right? And then move up the ladder because by the way, like connection is also not once and for all. Like even in our closest, most intimate relationships, we're not like full attunement all the time. Like
Mhm.
bit this idea of bits for connection in intimate relationships. Like we drop each other,
Mhm.
we are distracted, busy, fail to attune, right? So yeah, I mean the work continues, right? It's not as if, we once we learn how to connect, we're just like perfect at it. So
Yeah.
what you're saying about not taking it personally, being able to tolerate and sort of hold that experience for yourself and not go to a place of what's wrong with me, like that's just going
Mhm.
to be helpful no matter
Yeah.
what.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm really glad that you joined me today. Is there anything that you haven't said yet that you want to say about connection before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess I would sort of maybe make just because of the work I do and all the work I do is with sort of people in the business world,
Mhm.
like executives, founders, investors. Um, if there are any of those people listening, or maybe even not, like it's connection is not something maybe we talk about a lot in the workplace. We no I don't get many sort of founder or investor clients coming to say I want to connect more. Right? That's not top of mind. Maybe they would go to someone else for that. But
Mm,
yet all the kinds of problems that they bring, right, are rooted in connection. Right?
mm,
I don't know like the relationships we have with our colleagues, right? Like I really need to give them this feedback, but I
mhm,
don't know how to. Or why aren't they giving me this thing that I want? Why do they relate to me in this way? Why are they constantly criticizing me? Or why
mm,
is my boss, why do they never relate to me in the way I want? Like it's all connection,
mm,
right? But we talk about it with a different language, perhaps, but we never realize it. It's all the same. It's all connection, right?
yeah,
I want things from you that I don't know how to get. The things I want to say to you, I don't know how to say, right?
mm,
It's all comes because I mean, just because they're workplace relationships, don't make them any less relationships, right? It's
right.
two people involved. So I just want to put that out there as well, because sometimes we have this bifurcation between
Yeah.
like the stuff we're talking about is all like, very personal, social, even romantic connection. And then work is like this whole separate thing. And it really isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, thank you for making that clarification or pointing that out. If people do want to connect with you on social media or through your website, how would they do that?
Yeah. So the best way to find me is through my website. It's just my first name dot coach. And I'll spell my first name because it's not a very common one. It's DALGLISH dot coach. You can find me there. I have my link to email me or get some time with me. So if your viewers are interested, they can reach me there.
Okay, great. And I'm going to put that in the show notes too, just so people can have that. So thank you so much, Dalglish, for being a guest on my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to those of you listening. I'm so glad you joined me for this episode of Get Out of Your Own Way. To go even deeper, join me for Self Care Sundays, monthly drop in sessions, and you can find out more at thehealingmodalities.com. You can also sign up for my weekly Self Care Seeds newsletter there. And join me again for Get Out of Your Own Way every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Central, and 3:30 p.m. Pacific time. Next time on Get Out of Your Own Way, I'll be having another guest join me to talk about how they've gotten in and out of their own way. So until next time, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. You have been listening to Get Out of Your Own Way. Get out of your way and get what you want through transformative self-care with me, April Yee. Tune in every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. In each episode, I present new questions that support you in building up your beliefs about yourself. To connect with me or for more information, you can email me at thehealingmodalities@gmail.com or visit my website, thehealingmodalities.com. See you soon.